And our next speaker is Marina Kazakova, a poet, and she will talk about questions of translation between Russian and English regarding what is called Symphonism. And Jan Peters, my colleague from Ghent, will reply. So please, Marina, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much to Volkmar and the rest for
and I
having
will
me.
reply. Sorry, Jan will later reply. Sorry. Yeah.
My name is again Marina, and I'm going to be speaking today to all of you about intercultural aspects of my current research on Symphonism. Actually, it is on how to translate lyric poetry into audiovisual medium. To begin with, I would like to say, since I'm Russian, that my heart is with all people directly or indirectly impacted by this horrible war that causes so much pain. Ironically, I was just finishing a call before our meeting with my long-term artistic collaborator, a designer from Kharkov, from Ukraine, Yulia, who is finalizing just at this very moment my first major research output, the book on Symphonism. We were talking with her about this design, and I shared with her the way I felt. Now it's very unprecedented to me to be feeling nervous before speaking today, because it was also regarding the translation between Russia and the West, the topic itself. And she said, you know what, look, we are still working on your poetry research together. I'm finalizing your book while I am studying in Madrid, and I'm worrying for all my family who is in Kharkov now. And friendship is friendship. It's beyond all those social political circumstances. So she wished me good luck for today, and sent a big hello to everyone. We are keeping strong while they are now deciding. They're having the second round of discussions now. I mean, the two governments, and I hope that yes, they will find a solution. Okay, I will start with the point that my vision, I think it's also relevant to to this present day context, that my vision for a world as a poet is for a world in which poetry unites people of all backgrounds and nationalities. And the vital aspect of bringing about such a world is translation, which is also, of course, an art on its own. For a long time, I've been engaged in the translation of my own work, interlingual translation, first of all, from, let's say, Russian to English, or from English, because the last 10 years I'm writing mostly in English, unfortunately, into Dutch or French. But also I'm preoccupied with translating my literary works from the medium of literature into the audiovisual medium. And there I wanted to explain the basic reasoning behind these endeavors of mine. Why am I doing those translations? Since I write, as I told, in Russian and English, which aren't the languages of Belgium, I'm putting my words either into performance or into drawings or into films through collaborations or on my own, with the hope to reach a broader audience. Second reason is poetry itself. Historically, this art form found its marginal position, and in the present day world, it has vanished as a cultural force, especially in the West. We see it now when I'm trying to get audience to my poetry evenings, collaborative efforts with several poets, that we are struggling to get to fill the hall with people. Therefore, it's our major struggle to use various translation techniques to gain a broader audience. But then there is also the third, which is, I think, the most important reason why I embarked on this translation journey of poetry into the audiovisual medium. The reason is the following. Translating the meaning of words is the least difficult task that translators face. The unique musicality each poet has, let's say his or her own signature, is just as important as what our poems say. Otherwise, it would be prose. Basically, I reason my need for inter-semiotic translation between two art forms, with the theme of the impossibility of an alphabetic language to accommodate the world as it exists, invisible or visible. So it is the situation when letters are not enough for me, maybe I'm not a good poet, compared to what is behind them. And that's why I see my experiments in visualizing poetry through audiovisual means as an attempt to somehow make up for the lack of sensual imagery of the letter sign. Later on, I will briefly explain the strategy I chose to do my inter-semiotic translations that I call Symphonism. But now a fascinating matter is to look at poetry translation from a cross-cultural perspective. So the question of translation of one language to another isn't simple. Proust once remarked that all poetry is written in a foreign language. Proust didn't, of course, have in mind actual foreign languages. Instead, the foreign language Proust had in mind was one he was in the process of inventing, the one that every poet invents on his own. But how can anyone then translate the language that is not spoken anywhere? How does one translate this otherness into another language or another art form? Proust experienced this foreignness himself when he translated the poems of John Ruskin into French. So his doubt as whether he had sufficient mastery of the language was so pronounced that he remarked, "I don't claim to know English, I claim to know Ruskin." Thus, to me, and my point as an artist who constantly deals with self-translations, is that one of the crucial aspects of translation is to be able to deal with transposing a certain way of thinking from one source or one medium to another. And Russian poetry hasn't been lucky with its translations into English. It has been so unlucky that it may seem that the problem is in the Russian language itself. It is a synthetic language, too flexible language, which cannot be reproduced adequately in analytic English with its iron word order. Successful translations are very rare, and usually translations are done by American or English poets who generally do not know Russian, or on the other side, by Slavic scholars and translators who have extremely vague conceptions of poetic techniques because they're not poets. Since the results in both cases are more than lamentable, working in tandem has become very popular. Translations done through cooperation between a poet and a Slavist. I will be talking about my collaboration a little bit later with Bart Dewolf, the Belgian visual artist. So this is my experience of tandem translation of a lyric poem into audiovisual medium. I'm a poet, he is a visual artist. We are from totally different cultural backgrounds. So another challenge that native English poets face when translating Russian poetry is because of the technique that Russian poets use. They use still rhythm and rhyme. And Anglo-American colleagues of ours, for them it's unthinkable nowadays. It's mostly free verse, which of course isn't a guarantee against banality. The example I wanted to mention is Joseph Brodsky, one of my favorite Russian writers. He himself refused from most of the translations proposed by his translators, collaborators, and also famous American poets who tried to translate his poetry. due to the same reasoning. So partially this is a consequence of Brodsky's insistence on preserving meter and rhyme in translation. So many critics dismissed this approach as a throwback to outdated translation methods and actually outdated form. And the fact that Brodsky learned English only as an adult and spoke it with a heavy Russian accent created additional suspicion. How could such a person presume to lecture native English speakers about the correct translation of poetry? And Brodsky's frustration with American translations of his poetry eventually led him to become his own translator. Now coming to my own practice. Often when sharing my poem translations with non-native speakers, I felt a lot was missed. And none of my poems, many English translations, elicited the same emotion as the original. As a result, the question came up of how to transfer, how to express the initial sound that I hear when writing a poem, because for me it's important. For every poet it's a different creative process. The way I work is I hear the sound, then I see images, and then I put it all in words. So the question is how to put this initial sound I hear when writing a poem and the feelings inherent in the source piece to the target source. So the starting point for my research was to figure out, what am I translating? Am I just translating the words that are on paper, or am I translating the initial sound, the initial images that were behind those words, behind this analytical process? And how do I translate this what of a lyric poem to another medium? So what is it that I'm translating? Is it the way I think? Is it the way I feel? Is it the way I hear the world? And how is my cultural background? Another question which puzzles me a lot for at least the last 11 years that I'm in Belgium, also being distant from my homeland. How is my cultural background influence the way I think and put it in words? Because every time I perform a poem, especially in the English speaking contexts in America, they come to me with a lot of feedback, positive feedback on the exotic aspect of my poetry, the way I put words. They hear that it's in English, but it's not in English. They immediately extract my Russianness in the way I put words, in of course the metaphors I use and I create that are of course referring to my cultural heritage. Anyway, so I don't see my motherland, Russia, as being defined by place, but by a sense of shared emotions. And it's a common culture that has a certain impact on us. And of course, the Russian language itself is the product of various foreign cultures and languages. Outside the Slavic languages, the vocabulary and literary style of Russian has been greatly influenced by Greek, Latin, French, German, and English. Also, modern Russian has a considerable number of words adopted from Tatar and other Turkic languages. I myself half Tatar, so I'm mixing also a lot of Tatar words, including and integrating a lot of Tatar words in my texts. So the very richness of the Russian language is a meeting of cultures and eventually blending to produce this beautiful thing as the Russian language. For years, I've been thinking of the connection between the cultural context and its influence on our artistic thinking. And it's curious to see how artists go back in time to bring out the knowledge of the past and the cultural heritage that marked their own thinking. So by looking at what has been done before, let's say in the Russian context and the Soviet context before me, I get inspiration that contributes to how I feel and view the world around me nowadays. I link the musical properties that are revealed in my poetry, the musical thinking that is inherent to my poetry with a certain way of artistic thinking characteristic to the Russian composers, artists, poets, writers of the 19th and the beginning of the 20th century. They've influenced me greatly. It's not only my opinion, but it's mostly the feedback of my friends and my community of Russian-speaking acquaintances who read my poetry written in the Russian language. They feel a lot of influences of artists from before. Thus, in my research, I'm dealing with transposing a certain way of artistic thinking, which I call symphonism, from one medium to another. Therefore, I propose symphonism as a translation strategy. So a little bit just short, what is symphonism for people who have never heard of this term before? It's one of the most significant phenomena of musical culture from the end of, that started from the end of the 18th century and lasted up to the mid 20th century. It's a different type of thinking, dissimilar to Baroque thinking. And Baroque thinking is characterized by the suite, a set of separate fragments, what's so-called fragmented thinking, often consisting of fragments. I don't know if there are people with musical background. So the way the suite is built, it's built of fragments that are often contrasting each other, but they are totally independent from each other. By the 17th century, Baroque thinking gave way to symphonic thinking, which is characterized by such a logic in which each subsequent part follows the previous one, carrying out the development in the spiral. And there are two basic features that characterize symfonism. The development of the idea, so every part is following the previous, and a qualitative transformation of the idea. So, okay, I will give examples later on. My collaboration with the visual artist Bart Dewolf exemplifies, as I told, the tandem method of translating a Russian poem into a series of drawings. We took my poem, which is called "On How the Palace Bridge Opens Up Its Hands." I don't know if it's very interesting to ask if the word "the palace bridge" speaks to, like, tells anything to the non-Russian speaking audience. Because later on, when I come to the question, what intercultural challenges we faced with Bart, this was one of the challenges. When it came to the use of words that speak to me as a Russian, and I don't need to visualize these words literally. When I point out the palace bridge or the Hermitage in the poem, and if I would be visualizing it through drawings, I might avoid literal visualization of the palace bridge because I have it already in my mind. But then for Bart, it didn't speak anything. So that was, but yeah, okay. So on how the palace bridge opens up its hands. Why is this translation, and what were the difficulties behind this collaboration with Bart? The intersection between drawing and poetry, this is actually the collaboration between a poet and the visual artist, isn't new. Poets have turned to artists for inspiration. Artists have looked to poetry as starting points for their work. Yet the forms seem so distinct. One is made of words, another of images. Do you see a connection between the two forms? I'll go so far as to say that both forms are forms of communication, and both can inspire a huge variety of interpretations. Poetry boils down to putting the best words in the best order. And certainly the right colors and hues in the particular order is important for drawing. But both forms are vessels for human emotion. And lyric poetry includes, of course, moments of movement, of dance, of music, rhythm, rhyme. When it comes to creating movement and music of the poem in the visual piece, where do I start? I try to approach the movement the way one reads a poem, reads it out loud. This is very important. Anything goes, any interpretation is valid. And the test is always that it should feel true to our experience of the music of the poem. So the visual interpretation of the visual translation of the poem should be true to the music qualities, sound qualities of poetry. That's very important for me. So by taking the music qualities of one lyric poem to be a powerful conceptual tool rather than just a mere aesthetic device, I adopted Symphonism as a strategy of this inter-semiotic translation. So I selected 4 means of Symphonism, such as composition, rhythm, tonality, and dynamics that are inherent already in my text to some extent, and applicable to both poetry and drawing to translate the musical essence from the verbal medium to the visual one. And so what we tried to do is to extrapolate, this is the word, first of all, the structure of the poem, which is a sonata symphonic form, exposition, development, and recapitulation, into the composition of the series of drawings, which was also built in a sonata allegro form. Then the tonality of this symphonic poem, the sadness that I tried to transmit through words, through the, let's say, color scheme of the drawings. Then the rhythm of a symphonic poem, through the rhythm in the drawings, various kinds, like it manifested in various repetitions, accents, alternations, technique of applying ink and paint, and so on and so forth. And the dynamics in a symphonic poem, which was extrapolated onto the dynamics in the drawings, manifested in saturation and sonority of various narrative elements of the drawing or of the technique. You can always learn more about our collaboration with Bart by reading a book that Yulia is finishing now. It will be published in March or April, and I will share it with all the PhD community, of course. Now, let me give you some examples of the intercultural and interlingual difficulties we faced in this translation process with Bart. So, the first challenge we faced when translating this symphonic poem into drawings was that we were translating the translation. Bart doesn't speak Russian, so he had to work with the English translation of the original poem. But the point was to actually translate the music qualities, the sound of the Russian poem, not to translate the words, the plot, let's say, which is actually like also a very controversial aspect because there is no plot in the poem. So, however, our concern was how much we were missing when working with the English translation of the original Russian text. Of course, we neglected the prosody of another language, the acoustic effect produced by words, and here, as a supporting tool, we used an audio visualization of the poem I made, a voiceover, so a poem was read out loud in the original language in Russian, accompanied by a few music pieces of Rachmaninoff and Mussorgsky that I felt were enhancing the rhythm and the dynamics of the poem. Bart was listening to it to get the music texture of the poem like a blind cat. So the danger was there. We were translating the translation, and this led Bart to miss subtle differences experienced, of course, by Russian speakers. So if it would be a Russian-speaking designer, the interpretation, of course, the visual interpretation would be very different. At this point in time, I realized that it wasn't the best decision to choose a Russian poem while working with an English-speaking artist, aiming to present the experiment to the English-speaking audience. So I should have picked an original poem written in English to avoid all this fuss that we faced with Bart in terms of interlingual translation and misunderstanding. Another example of the challenge we faced, by integrating my poetry into the language of visuals, we had to work with two themes in Bart's drawings, the comparable and the artistic. What we tried to keep comparable was the setting of the poem, the characters mentioned in the poem, like Proust, Sagan, Margaret Duras, all those references to geographical places, so-called the plot. And in this sense, Bart tried to create a carefully drawn world in the spirit of the original. The artistic side of the translation was conducted by isolating certain images from the poem and using them as details in the composition of the frame. So it's the same as we do with montage in filmmaking. So in the intercultural challenges we faced when it came to translating this comparable part, for any Russian, the images of the Hermitage, as I said, and of the palace bridge opening up its hands, it's obvious and it immediately speaks to the Russian audience. For Bart, who is a Belgian guy, this imagery didn't tell anything, didn't know how the Hermitage and Palace Bridge look like. Thus, it became obvious to me that this should be drawn literally in order to translate the word Hermitage and the words Palace Bridge to the foreign audience. Another challenge was metaphors. It has been argued that metaphors can become a translation problem, and it was. So let's just listen to two lines of a poem. The palace bridge is spreading arms. The waters are wide open. The air is fulfilled with one long blast of a departing ship's horn. So what I see in these words as a Russian is an opening bridge that gives way to the ship to pass through the waters over the Neva River to the open Baltic Sea. And an open space full of hope. What Bart saw and what he intended with his first sketch, storyboard, was a splitting apart, the bridge splitting apart, disconnectedness, broken dreams, and it's the end of the poem, yes? So a very gloomy end. But it was not a gloomy end. We started with, the poem starts with the closed bridge, heavy low skies of St. Petersburg. And we went through the development in the poem and what I intend as a poet and what lyrical character feels is that the skies are brighter, the clouds are gone, the bridge is opening, and the ship is leading, into the future. So that's when we had to discuss with Bart, because really he was misinterpreting. I wasn't imposing anything in the very beginning, but we had to have long discussions on what I mean and what I tried to transmit through those lines. My conclusion is just what I wanted to say is those metamorphoses of poetic text when crossing cultural boundaries that I tried to reflect upon confirm that poetry translation is possible, but it is necessary to draw attention to the fact that the whole range of versions of a poetic text transformed by its translators constitute a constantly changing image of its author in the domain of world literature. So this is it. Thank you very much. Welcome. I think I give the floor to you.